Thank you, Margaret and Ellen, and good evening, everyone. I am Philip Hardwood. I am an adult reference librarian at Elmont Memorial Library and a substitute at Island Park Public Library, and I'm also a film, media, and music historian. I do teach film studies as an adjunct lecturer at LIU Post in the Hutton House Lectures, which is their lifelong learning program. I am an adjunct professor of film at St. Francis College. I also teach film courses at JCC Manhattan, 92nd Street Y, Cinema Arts Center, and a number of other venues. I'm also a published author. I have a chapter on the film career of Jack Benny, which is part of an anthology called Well, Reflections on the Life and Career of Jack Benny, edited by Mike Liana for Bear Manor Media. So we're going to take a visual look at the life and career of Leonard Bernstein. Show of hands, has anyone here ever seen Leonard Bernstein in performance? I mean, live.
That include watching West Side Story?
Well, he's not in, well, unless, okay.
Well,
He did record, and that you mentioned something here. In 1985, Deutsche Grammophon invited him to record the cast album recording of West Side Story with opera singers. So he took Jose Carreras, Kiri Tikenua, Teresa Stratus, and a number of other vocalists, and he recorded a studio version of West Side Story. Studio meaning they all went into a studio in Manhattan and they recorded highlights from West Side Story. So he himself had never conducted the entire score. Like he did conduct the opening during one of the performances on Broadway, but he never recorded the whole show. And he also did the Symphonic Dances, which was a best-selling Columbia recording. And he also did it with the Israeli Philharmonic. But he did, if you've ever seen the video of him actually conducting that performance, that recording, it's called The Making of West Side Story. And you get to see him argue with Jose Carreras because Jose Carreras couldn't really sing. He couldn't say certain words properly. So he kept not really doing certain takes or sort of goofing up on certain takes, not intentionally, but Bernstein shows his patience. But it's just great to see him conduct and record that. And that's one of the things that is available to you are the many performances of Leonard Bernstein in concert. I used to refer to him as the original man of all media because he made hundreds and hundreds of recordings that are still available on different labels, RCA Victor, Columbia, Deutsche Grammophon, Angel Records, and they are constantly being repackaged. So you always have access to his recordings, not only through your library. If you buy albums, they're called compact discs now. If you stream music, they're available on Hoopla, Spotify, and you can also get his recordings through your local library. So they're not only recordings, but DVDs of TV performances, the Young People's Concerts, Omnibus, which I'm actually doing a program here at Elmont on the Omnibus years. We'll talk more about that momentarily. But he is accessible. Even so many years after his passing in October of 1990, he's available through video, through recordings. The Norton lectures, which he did at Harvard, those are available. And if you remember the Young People's Concerts, growing up seeing him on CBS or seeing him in person, he had a major influence on many musicians. So I'm going to now share my screen.
Hold on one second. I just want to add, I'm going to put everyone on mute because we're getting some background noise.
Yeah, I hear it too.
And Philip, can please unmute yourself?
I am unmuted. Okay. So now I'm going to share my screen. And let's see. And you can all see me good. Okay. And then we're going to go to for beginning. There we go. Let me just go backtrack a bit. Okay. This is a montage. I mentioned before the hundreds of CDs that are available of Leonard Bernstein's. His first recording label was RCA Victor. And soon after he passed away, RCA released these 4 CDs of his earliest recordings. These are all were recorded for RCA Victor. And as you can see, he was very young. These were all recorded in the mid to late 40s. This is after his debut with the New York Philharmonic, and I'll talk more about that. The historic debut, November 14th, 1943. So these are all recordings made between 1944 and 1950. So these are like his earliest recordings that are available still. These might be out of print, but you can always get these through the local library, eBay, Amazon. They're still out there. So Leonard Bernstein, I touched the keys and found God. This is a reference to the piano that was sent to the Bernstein home in Massachusetts from Aunt Clara. Aunt Clara was moving. She didn't have room for a piano. She sent it to the Bernstein home. And Bernstein said he felt the keys and found God. This is like the beginnings of him learning to play the piano, mostly self-taught, and starting to perform as a pianist before becoming a conductor. One of the quotes of Leonard Bernstein: "Music can name the unnameable and communicate the unknowable." This is something to think about, which was quoted by Leonard Bernstein. Some basic info about Leonard Bernstein. Leonard Bernstein, born Louis, but changed to Leonard at age 16. Born August 25th, 1918 in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Died October 14th, 1990 in New York. This is actually Bernstein conducting his first concert with the Hollywood Bowl in the mid-40s. As composers go, Leonard Bernstein probably attracted more divided opinion during his lifetime than any other. His music, his sexuality, we'll talk more about that, his politics, his outspokenness, they all attracted comment. Despite this, was an amazing, energetic man who remains a commanding figure in 20th century classical music. The early years. Let's talk about Leonard Bernstein in the early years. Here we have Jenny and Max, parents of Leonard Bernstein. He was the eldest, so he was the first to be born. This is Leonard at 3 years old. Max owned a skincare business, and his intention was that Leonard would take over the business. Jenny was a housewife. Now, Leonard, eventually, when he began to become interested in music and wanted to become a composer, Max said, "No, you're going to go to college, you're going to go to Harvard, and then you're going to take over the family business." Max's feeling about music and musicians is that it would be like a klezmer receiving a crumpet or a loaf of bread in order for doing a concert. So he didn't think highly that musicians were should be a career, not for his son, Lenny. So this is Leonard at a very early age. Family is now growing, so here's Max and Jenny, and here is Sister Shirley. So Sister Shirley came along. Then there was another member of the family that was born soon after. Burton was the youngest, and he eventually would write a book about the family called Family Matters. So that book was published in 1970 about the life of being a Bernstein. Now, this is interesting. This is a playbill that was created in 1936. This was when Leonard Bernstein and his family would be on family vacation. And Leonard and his sister and other young members of the community would take part in performing Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. So here is under the direction of a very young Leonard Bernstein, the HMS Pinafore by Gilbert and Sullivan. So this was performed August 29th, 1936 at 8:30 p.m. So here we see members of the cast. Leonard Bernstein played Captain Corcoran. And of course, we see members of the cast here. So this is all, and proceeds were donated to charity. Leonard Bernstein also did the choreography, Egyptian dances by Shirley Bernstein and the twins Kaplan. Those were friends of the Bernsteins. So here, this is an early family affair. when the Bernsteins were on vacation. Here is a very young Leonard Bernstein at Aunt Clara's piano. This is in the family living room, Bernstein performing on the piano. So the earliest age, Bernstein wanted to be a classical performer. First he wanted to be a pianist, and eventually he wanted to become a conductor. Now, Leonard was a counselor at a camp, and here is Leonard Bernstein, 1937, conducting the camp band. So here is a very early Leonard Bernstein conducting the camp band while being a counselor away at camp. Now here we come to Leonard Bernstein at Harvard. Leonard Bernstein graduating from Harvard with music theory, and eventually he would go on to the Curtis Institute. And here is Leonard Bernstein's class photo from the Curtis Institute. Curtis Institute was a music school in Philadelphia, and that is where Bernstein studied with Randall Thompson and also Fritz Reiner, studied with Fritz Reiner for conducting. Here is a class photo from the Curtis Institute. This gentleman here at the piano is Randall Thompson. Here are various students, and here is a young Leonard Bernstein. This is around 1939. And here's another class photo of students at the Curtis Institute. Here's Leonard back here. There's one of the students at the Curtis Institute. Here are other fellow music students. I have an idea this might be Seymour Lipkin, who became a pianist, but that is one of Leonard's classmates. And again, this is around 1940-41. Now, here's one of the earliest photos of Leonard Bernstein and Aaron Copland. Now, the story behind their meeting, it was November 14th, 1937. Now, as Bernstein would say on one of the young people's concerts, you can always tell how old Aaron Copland was by the year, because Aaron Copland was born in 1900. So Copland is 37 at this time this photo was taken. Now, what's interesting is that Bernstein in college, when he was at Harvard and the Curtis Institute, he used to play a piece that he loved by Aaron Copland called the Piano Variations. It's a 10-minute atonal piece, and Bernstein loved to play it at campus parties. Think about that. If a show of hands, have any of you heard the Copland Piano Variations? It's something you usually don't play at a party. So Bernstein always thought that Copland was like a Walt Whitman type with a long beard. And at a dance recital of Anna Sokolov, November 14th, 1937, Aaron Copland's 37th birthday, Bernstein and Copland met for the first time. And after their meeting, Copland invited Bernstein to his loft at the hotel, which is right by Lincoln Center, which is, I believe it's the hotel, I'm getting the name, but it's now a condominium out and a hotel, still a hotel, right by Lincoln Center. And Copland said to Bernstein, I bet you can't play my piano variations. Bernstein played the variations, and they became friends for life. So Copland became one of Bernstein's not only friends, but also mentors, and Bernstein would conduct and record many of Copland's works. As a matter of fact, one of the last concerts that Bernstein conducted with the New York Philharmonic, I attended in October of 1989. It was an all Copland concert. So they became what Bernstein would refer to as Moses und Aaron. Like Copland was like the Moses of American music, and Bernstein was like the assistant, the messenger, because Bernstein would perform and conduct much of Copland's music. And here they are again, rehearsing. And this is later during Bernstein's directorialship of the New York Philharmonic, Copland studying a score with Bernstein. Bernstein would always refer to Copland when he was writing a work, and Copland would say, that sounds a little bit like Brahms, you can do better than that. So Copland was sort of like Bernstein's not only friend, but also his cheerleader. And, he would tell Bernstein, it sounds like warm Brahms. It sounds a little bit like Randall Thompson. You can do better than that type of thing. Now, this is from an exhibit at the New York Philharmonic during the Bernstein Centennial, the celebration of 100 years of Bernstein. These are various mentors and musicians that had an effect on Bernstein, worked with Bernstein, or had a major effect on him. Dmitri Mitropoulos was the conductor, a music director of the New York Philharmonic, and Bernstein would take over the New York Philharmonic after Mitropoulos stepped down. Serge Koussevitzky, major influence for Bernstein. He became sort of like a surrogate father. Bernstein became his assistant at Tanglewood as part of the Tanglewood Music Institute. And Koussevitzky would give Bernstein his cape and cufflinks. Now, at the beginning of every concert, this is even after Koussevitzky would pass away, Bernstein would wear the cape given to him by Koussevitzky and the cufflinks. He would kiss the cufflinks of Koussevitzky before every concert. And Bernstein claimed that Koussevitzky died in his arms. I'm not sure how true that was, but there was a major influence between Koussevitzky and Bernstein. And of course, I mentioned Aaron Copland, major musical influence, also lifelong friend of Bernstein's from 1937. And both composers, both Copland and Bernstein, passed away the same year, 1990. So they were part of each other's lives for decades. George Gershwin, although Bernstein never met George Gershwin, Gershwin was always an influence on Bernstein. Gershwin also, during his lifetime, the question was, did Gershwin want to be a classical composer, a Broadway composer, or a composer of popular music? You know, what did Gershwin want to do? And what's interesting is that I mentioned Bernstein at that camp. When it was reported that Gershwin passed away, Bernstein was in the camp cafeteria, and immediately he began playing the Rhapsody in Blue from experience and from memory. And Mark Blitzstein, who wrote The Cradle Will Rock, Bernstein would conduct a performance at Harvard, and he became a confidant of Mark Blitzstein, conducting many of Blitzstein's works, including the Airborne Symphony. So again, another influence in the life of Leonard Bernstein. Now, here is probably the earliest photo of Leonard Bernstein conducting. Here is Serge Koussevitzky and Mrs. Koussevitzky at Saranac. This is the home of Serge Koussevitzky at Tanglewood. Here is a young Leonard Bernstein. This is around 1940. And Bernstein is conducting a concert in the garden at Saranac, as you can see here. Now, Bernstein wrote 3 symphonies in his life. His first symphony, Symphony Number 1, was the Jeremiah. Jenny Turrell was a soloist that worked and collaborated with Bernstein many times, many years. It was she was one of Bernstein's favorite soloists. And the Bernstein Symphony, the Jeremiah, premiered in St. Louis. And also, he would eventually conduct the work with the New York Philharmonic, make recordings with the New York Philharmonic for Columbia. But this is around 1942, and this is the same year that Bernstein would premiere his Sonata for Clarinet and Piano, which Bernstein also made a private recording of, which actually is available on a Pearl CD. That is out of print, but you can find many recordings of the Clarinet Sonata on YouTube. So that's the Jeremiah Symphony, his first symphony, premiered in 1942. The road to fame. So now Bernstein's rise to fame was rapid. He was unexpectedly named assistant conductor of the New York Philharmonic with less than 24 hours notice when he was called upon to stand in for flu-stricken Bruno Walter. The program at Carnegie Hall included works by Schumann, Miklos, Rocha, Wagner, and Richard Strauss. His Don Quixote by Richard Strauss. Soloist was Joseph Schuster, solo cellist of the New York Philharmonic. After a brilliant performance, he made the front page of the New York Times the following morning. So just to reiterate, Leonard Bernstein became the assistant conductor to Artur Rudzinski. When Artur Rudzinski was asked why did he choose Leonard Bernstein as his assistant conductor, Rudzinski said he was told to do so by God. The real story is that Bernstein was the assistant to Serge Koussevitzky at Tanglewood. And Bernstein also won a musical quiz where he won a scholarship at Tanglewood. But since he already had the scholarship at Tanglewood, he was offered the role of guest conducting the Boston Pops Orchestra in 1940. Which also that had an effect on him also. His father took him to his first concert when he was a pre-teenager. He heard Arthur Fiedler conduct the Boston Pops in a performance of Ravel's Bolero, and then Bernstein wanted to not be only a pianist, but he wanted to be a conductor. This is the program for the New York Philharmonic on that day, November 14th. And that date is very important. November 14th was the date in 1937 when he met Aaron Copland. And what happened before this concert is that Bernstein was asleep. He had been performing his song cycle, I Hate Music, the night before. And his parents had come in from Boston with Burton, little Burton, and they had attended his recital at the town hall. As they were getting ready to leave to go back to Boston, Bernstein is awakened by Bruno Zurata, who was the manager, the general manager of the New York Philharmonic. And he wakes Bernstein up and says, "This is it, Lenny, you're going to guest conduct the New York Philharmonic." Now, this was Sunday, November 14th, 1943. Keep in mind that this concert was broadcast live on CBS Radio. It was a Sunday afternoon concert. And Bernstein had no rehearsal prior to this. He didn't even have a tuxedo to wear during the concert, so he had to wear a suit. He goes to the Carnegie Hall coffee shop, which is now Zankel Hall at Carnegie Hall, and the manager of the store, I guess the person behind the counter, saw that he was a little nervous, gave him some pills and said, "Take these before you perform. It'll relax you." So Bernstein is waiting in the wings, ready to go out on stage, and he hears the announcer say that Bruno Walter is unable to attend or perform the concert. In his place is the young guest conductor, Leonard Bernstein. Burton, the brother, remembers seeing people get out of their seats saying, "Oh, they wanted their money back," and that type of thing. So Leonard Bernstein said he remembers looking at the pills that he was given. He throws them across, not in back of him. He didn't throw them across the stage. He goes out on stage, and he said the next thing he knew, people were giving him a standing ovation. So here you see the item in the New York Times. This is from the front page of the New York Times. Remember, this is wartime. This is 1943. This is the height of World War II, and he makes the front page. This is the concert that he performed. Notice that Bruno Walter's name is crossed out and Leonard Bernstein's name is typed in. And here's young Leonard Bernstein, 26 years of age, being congratulated by members of the New York Philharmonic. Now, there is a CD available of the concert. It is available through the New York Philharmonic. The CD offers the Schumann, the Rocha, and the Strauss. The Wagner's left off because there wasn't enough time left on the CD, but this is part of the original program. So this is from Max's scrapbook, "Father in Tears, Boys Conductor Triumph." This is from the local newspaper in Massachusetts. And again, here is the program. Of course, the father typed in bold letters Leonard Bernstein's name. So it was his son after all. Max was eventually interviewed at one point and asked him, "How did you feel about your son becoming a musician?" And the father's response was, "How did I know he was going to become Leonard Bernstein?" So there you have it. But here's a young Leonard Bernstein rehearsing at the piano. Here's a autograph photo that Bernstein sent to his fellow musicians after the initial historical concert. This was big stuff. This is a young 25, 26-year-old conductor, assistant conductor, who was in New York trying to fulfill his dreams. He was trying to become a composer, a musician, and this was it. This is really what set the stage for his road to fame as a conductor. Here is a photo at Tanglewood of a concert, and here we have some very well-known people. Here's Serge Kouzovitsky, Aaron Copland, Leonard Bernstein with the cigarette, of course, and Lucas Foss. Lucas Foss, another composer who studied at Tanglewood. Keep in mind that Leonard Bernstein, from the earliest age, had emphysema. The man smoked 5 packs of cigarettes a day. Whenever you see Bernstein being interviewed in later years, he always has that cigarette. Either he's smoking the cigarette, or he's touching the cigarette, or he's fondling the cigarette. But the cigarette always became part of the Bernstein mystique. He always had that cigarette. Here again is Bernstein with Kouzovitsky looking over a score. Bernstein again would compose both serious music and began composing ballet and Broadway musicals. Kouzovitsky would say, "You had your fun, now get back to serious work." Now, here is an image from a ballet. This is the first collaboration of Leonard Bernstein and Jerome Robbins. Jerome Robbins plays a very important role in the life of Leonard Bernstein. Jerome Robbins came to New York. He and Bernstein were both born the same year, 1918. Robbins began studying movement of real people. He would go to Central Park and study the movement. Sailors were in town during they were on leave during World War II. And Robbins wanted to create real ballet, not Swan Lake, not the classics. He wanted to do real American ballet. Now, keep in mind, during the 1930s and 40s, you had American ballet. You had the Slaughter on 10th Avenue by Richard Rodgers. You had George Balanchine creating ballet music set to Richard Rodgers, to George Gershwin, to Jerome Kern. What you had with young American dancers is that they wanted to dance to jazz. They did dance to the classics, but they also wanted to dance to modern American music. Aaron Copland was composing ballets such as Appalachian Spring, also Billy the Kid. If you look at Broadway in the 1940s, you start to see ballet incorporated into musicals like Oklahoma and Carousel. So here is an image from Fancy Free. This was premiered at the Metropolitan Opera House in 1944, and it's music by Leonard Bernstein, choreography by Jerome Robbins, who played one of the 3 sailors. Here he is right here, and it's about 3 sailors on leave and they're on leave for 24 hours and their adventures in New York. If that sounds familiar, this ballet originally was fleshed out to become On the Town, which opened in 1945. This included a libretto and score by Betty Comden, who you see here, and Adolph Green. This is one of the many collaborations between Comden Green and Leonard Bernstein. And here you see also a young Nancy Walker. So this is an image from the original cast of On the Town. Now, MGM would buy the rights to On the Town. The film adaptation would not come until 1949. We'll talk more about that momentarily. Here's an image from the Broadway production of On the Town. As you can see here, the 3 sailors on leave, and this opened, as I mentioned, 1945. Here are the artists composing, or it's really a staged photo of composing the score to On the Town. Here's Leonard Bernstein with the cigarette, Jerome Robbins, another cigarette, Betty Comden, and Adolph Green. Leonard Bernstein started his tenure at the New York City Center in 1945. Here is Bernstein conducting a rehearsal performance at the New York City Center. Bernstein again with a cigarette at a rehearsal at the New York City Center. I mentioned Bernstein's initial concert with the Hollywood Bowl. This is an ad for the Hollywood Bowl. Of course, they had baseball, Hollywood versus Los Angeles, but if you look at the top here, Soloists and orchestra, Oscar Levant was pianist, Leonard Bernstein conducting at the Hollywood Bowl. This is around 1949. I mentioned the RCA Victor recordings that Bernstein made on the town ballet dancers. This is the actual 78 album that Bernstein is autographing for Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. Fiorello LaGuardia. We don't know whether he listened to it, but we do know that he was given a copy by Leonard Bernstein. So here we have that image there. Here's Leonard Bernstein playing at the piano at a late night gig. Again, this is around 1945, 46. And let's see if I have the notes here. No, I don't. Let's go back to that. This is Bernstein conducting at a local temple. Bernstein wrote a lot of Judaic music, Judaic choral music. Naxos released a series of Judaic recordings. There's one CD of Bernstein's Judaic choral music, which includes the Chichester Psalms, the Jeremiah Symphony, and this is from 1950. Here's Bernstein composing at the piano. I mentioned RCA Victor. Here's an ad for Bernstein and also Robert Merrill and Yehudi Menuhin, who all recorded for the Victor record label. This is an ad for RCA Victor rather. This is a photo from 1947 with Bernstein becoming not the assistant conductor of the New York Philharmonic and making such an impression in 1943. Hollywood was knocking. Hollywood sees this man. He's 25. He's young. He's American. The typical conductor that conducted usually at this time was usually European, over 50, and someone like Toscanini or Koussevitzky or Stokowski or Sir Thomas Beecham. This is unusual. This is a young American composer, and Hollywood was even thinking of starring Bernstein in a film biography on Tchaikovsky. And one actress who became very good friends, two actresses, I should say, Lauren Bacall became very friendly with Bernstein, but it was Bette Davis. Bette Davis heard Bernstein perform at Hollywood Bowl and became fascinated. Now, Bette Davis did not like a lot of people. You know, she tolerated people. She had a few friends, but Bernstein really had an effect on her. And whenever Bernstein was in town, Davis would always attend his concerts. So they became not really friends, but Bernstein really enjoyed seeing Bernstein in concert. Here's Bernstein teaching at Tanglewood. Here's Artur Rudzinski listening as Bernstein is playing parts of his second symphony, The Age of Anxiety, and these are some of his students at Tanglewood. And here's Bernstein again performing for his students at Tanglewood. And here is the premiere of the second symphony. Here is Serge Koussevitzky congratulating Bernstein. And I'll just read the caption here. Bernstein with conductor Serge Koussevitzky after the performance of Age of Anxiety, Symphony No. 2 at Tanglewood. And the symphony is available. Bernstein would record it with the New York Philharmonic, with the Israeli Philharmonic. And there's a label called Pristine Classical. They release a CD every week. And you can either purchase a CD or get their recordings online. They can send you an MP3 file. And they actually released this performance, live performance of Bernstein's Age of Anxiety, conducted by Koussevitzky. But at this time, also Bernstein was veering into Broadway again. And he was also still conducting the New York City Symphony. This is one of the ad pieces for the concerts he gave at the New York City Symphony. And yet here's another ad piece here. And here's Bernstein composing in his apartment in Manhattan. You may remember or recall, you might be too young to remember, the Lewisohn Stadium, which is at the City University of New York. This was an amphitheater that hosted many concerts. Gershwin performed there, Fritz Reiner, Oscar Levant. Bernstein conducted many concerts at Lewiston Stadium, and he also worked with many soloists, including Marian Anderson, who you can see here, and a young pianist named William Capel, who left us too soon, died in a plane crash, but he made many recordings which are now available on the RCA Victor label. And what's interesting about these concerts during the 1950s, Bernstein would conduct summer concerts at the Lewiston Stadium, and then he would go into a recording soundstage at night and make recordings. And he also did a series of instructional recordings where, for example, if he recorded the Ninth Symphony of Dvorak, he would make the recording and then he would do an analysis of that particular symphony. Now, later on, when he recorded for Columbia, he would make a recording like Symphony Fantastique by Berlioz. He recorded a short little recording called Berlioz Takes a Trip. And that's referring to the fact that the main character that's musically personified in Symphony Fantastique takes an overdose of opium because he's enchanted with this actress. And it sort of mirrors real life because Berlioz actually was infatuated with an actress who eventually married and then divorced because he realized he wasn't really compatible with this woman. That's another story. But Bernstein would record these analyses of the New World Symphony, the Eroica by Beethoven, and this would all be done in one, the performance at Lewiston Stadium, the late night recording sessions. And keep in mind, this is before he was married. So that, he had a lot of time where he just was unstoppable, just had this amazing amount of energy. Now, also, Bernstein had a relationship with Israel. Bernstein conducted and performed at this concert during the war for Israel's independence in 1948. So these are two images here at that concert. So in the midst of the war, Bernstein is performing and conducting in what was then Israel. And here's Bernstein looking at a poster promoting his upcoming concerts with the Palestine Philharmonic Orchestra, which eventually would become the Israel Philharmonic Concert. So this is a poster promoting that. Now, this is interesting. This is from 1948. Bernstein conducted a concert with Holocaust survivors. These were all musicians who had survived the Holocaust. This is the program here. This was performed in Munich in 1948. Here is Bernstein rehearsing with the orchestra. Here is Bernstein receiving the curtain call, the applause of the orchestra, and Bernstein receiving flowers from a young attendee at that particular concert. And again, this is from 1948. That's a repeat of a slide I had before. Now, this is interesting. Here's Saul Chaplin, Bernstein, and Gene Kelly during rehearsals for the film version of On the Town. Now, when MGM bought the rights to On the Town, Arthur Freed was the head of the Freed unit, one of the units at MGM that produced musicals. Now, Arthur Freed, who was a composer himself before becoming a producer of musicals, felt that most of the score of On the Town was very atonal and would not be understood by attendees to screenings in the Midwest. He had this feeling that songs like I Can Cook Too, Lonely Town, and Lucky to Be Me would not be acceptable to certain audiences. So most of the score of On the Town was thrown out, and Roger Edens, who was an associate producer at MGM, was also a composer, composed new songs with Betty Comden and Adolph Green. Now, Bernstein was paid $25,000 for the rights to his songs. Only 4 were used in the film, and the rest of the songs were written by Roger Edens, Betty Comden, and Adolph Green. Bernstein, at the point that the songs were being created for the film version, Bernstein was in Europe touring. He was conducting. When Bernstein learned what happened and that Comden and Green didn't vouch for his music that was dropped from the film, they didn't speak for the longest time. There was a rift between Comden, Green, and Bernstein because he felt that they did not champion his music, and he felt that by them composing other music inserted in the score was a blight against him. But again, eventually they made up and they healed their differences. Bernstein was asked by a composer to write Woody Herman. Woody Herman invited Bernstein to write a piece for Woody Herman to perform with his orchestra. And as a result, Woody Herman declared bankruptcy and never paid Bernstein for the piece, but it was Bernstein's piece. It was introduced by Benny Goodman. Bernstein made a recording with Benny Goodman in 1950, and Bernstein would also perform it on Omnibus, one of the omnibus programs he would do in the 1950s. Now, Bernstein continued to write for Broadway. This is an early musical of Peter Pan. This is not to be confused with the Mary Martin Peter Pan that came a couple of years later. This Peter Pan starred Jean Arthur as Peter Pan and Boris Karloff as Captain Hook. So this is an early musical of Leonard Bernstein's. It was recorded for Columbia, and it was re-recorded in the late 1990s. It was actually a new recording made, but for many years it was not performed. It had not been revived, and just the last couple of years, there have been revivals of this early musical of Leonard Bernstein's. Now, Bernstein made his television debut in 1949 on CBS. This was a concert for the United Nations. Eleanor Roosevelt was in attendance, and Aaron Copland, premiered his preamble for orchestra, which had narration by this gentleman here, Laurence Olivier, and here's also the violinist. Actually, this is the choral director, Robert Shaw, not to be confused with the actor Robert Shaw. But they all were part of this musical tribute to the United Nations at Carnegie Hall. And again, this was in 1949, and again, Leonard Bernstein's television debut. Now, here is a faded family portrait of Leonard Bernstein and his then girlfriend, before they were married, Felicia Montenegre. Now, and I want to mention the other members here. This is Shirley, Bernstein's sister, brother Burton, Jenny, and Max. So this is a family portrait. And Felicia and Bernstein started dating in 1947-48. Bernstein, just as many of you may not know, he was bisexual, and one of the things he dealt with was marrying a woman, and she knew about his sexual preferences. He was bisexual, but he was in love with her, but it was an off-again, on-again relationship. Bernstein could not commit, and finally he did, and they eventually were married in 1951, and this is their marriage wedding photo. Bernstein actually borrowed pants from a friend because he didn't have a full suit when he did get married. So this is the wedding portrait of Leonard and Felicia. Now, Trouble in Tahiti. This is a one-act opera that Bernstein composed for Brandeis University. And it's a one-act opera. And in the opera, you have a husband, a wife, and a child. You never see the child, but it's the arguing between husband and wife. And allegedly, this was inspired by Bernstein. He wrote this during his honeymoon. It was inspired by his parents, Max and Jenny. And his parents fought all the time, to a point where at points Bernstein had to be like a referee standing between Max and Jenny, because they almost came to throwing things at each other, came to blows, and Bernstein had to stand between the two parents. They stayed married for many years, up until Max's passing. And Jenny actually lived until after Bernstein passed away. But this is the original cast album that was recorded just after the opera premiered at Brandeis University. And here's Bernstein rehearsing the small ensemble for Trouble in Tahiti at Brandeis. Bernstein made his CBS omnibus debut on November 14th, 1954. Again, there's that date again, November 14th, and then that was 1954. These are two images. Bernstein's first broadcast with Omnibus was performing the first movement of the Beethoven Fifth Symphony and showing different interpretations of what Bernstein would have written if he had composed the symphony differently. Supposedly Beethoven had different sketches of what he wanted for the Fifth Symphony. So Bernstein actually conducts different versions of that first movement. The broadcasts of Omnibus are all available on this DVD set, which is available. And one of Bernstein's first books was The Joy of Music, which contains imaginary conversations, and also scripts from Omnibus. And this book has been, as with many of his other books, have been reprinted through the years and is available. And here's another shot of Leonard Bernstein on Omnibus and being photographed by a CBS camera. 1954, Bernstein conducts Medea at La Scala, and the soloist, of course, was Maria Callas. Here's Maria Callas and Leonard in a later photo, but they worked very well together. This collaboration was a major success. Now, Broadway continues with Leonard Bernstein, Wonderful Town. This is a music adaptation of My Sister Eileen, about Ruth and Eileen McKinney. In this case, they're Ruth and Eileen Sherwood, two sisters who venture to New York and live in Greenwich Village seeking their dreams. Again, here's Betty Comden, Rosalind Russell, Adolph Green, the authors of the book of Wonderful Town, and Leonard rehearsing. This is the November 1954 issue of The Atlantic. Bernstein is, again, the question is, does he want to be a symphonic composer or a musical comedy composer? Can he make up his mind? So again, the symphonies that he composed, The Wonderful Town, the conducting of various orchestras. Here are two images from the original cast. Actually, this is from the 1958 telecast of Wonderful Town. And here's Edie Adams and Rosalind Russell in the 1953 Broadway production of Wonderful Town. Now, another thing that Bernstein was getting into, but not as much, was film composing. He composed the score for On the Waterfront. Here's Rod Steiger and Marlon Brando in that famous taxi scene that could have been contender scene. Bernstein felt that by composing a film score, and he wrote an op-ed article for the New York Times, that when you write a film score, it no longer becomes your own when you give it to the producers. They cut it, they add dialogue, they add sound effects, and it no longer becomes, it's almost like a novelist writing a novel and it being edited and not the same work you sent in. So Bernstein eventually would conduct and record a symphonic suite from On the Waterfront. It would be coupled with symphonic dances from West Side Story. That became a best-selling Columbia recording. He would eventually record it with Deutsche Grammophon. And just recently, the original tracks to On the Waterfront have been released. So it is a beautiful score. He was nominated for an Academy Award, but did not win. But here's a lobby card from On the Waterfront. Bernstein's family began to grow. Here is daughter Jamie and son Alexander. And as a matter of fact, when Bernstein premiered his symphonic suite from On the Waterfront in 1955, a year after the film was released, he dedicated that suite to little Alexander. It's been seen here. And here is Time magazine promoting conductor Leonard Bernstein. He was the big man on campus. He hadn't become the director yet of the New York Philharmonic, but he was making waves on recordings, on television. And the fact is that he was young and he had this beautiful wife, and he was all over the place going to premieres, going to the premiere of Wonderful Town. And of course, this show, Candide, which opened in 1956, was not a success. Here's Barbara Cook singing Glitter and Be Gay. She is Cunegonde. And here actually is a manuscript from that song in Bernstein's handwriting. Here's the the front page of the playbill and the cast album. This show, based on the Voltaire novel, would be revamped and restructured and revised, and Stephen Sondheim would contribute to it, and Lillian Hellman did contribute to the original production, but eventually it would be revised through the years and become more of a success than it was when it opened. Now, Bernstein's collaborator, Jerome Robbins, had this idea of doing a jazz version of Romeo and Juliet and eventually a ballet of Romeo and Juliet. This eventually became an idea called East Side Story, about a girl who was a survivor of the Holocaust and an Irish boy. Bernstein was told by associates that it sounded too much like Abbey's Irish Rose, and Bernstein went and worked on other projects. Eventually, the collaborators came back together with this group. So you have a young Stephen Sondheim. Here's Arthur Lawrence, who wrote the book. Harold Prince, who was the producer. Here is Leonard Bernstein and Jerome Robbins. This is one of the relaxed moments during the production stage of West Side Story. And here is a rehearsal with young Stephen Sondheim and Bernstein. Bernstein is ecstatic. He is leaving the theater at the Washington premiere of West Side Story. Here is the playbill, Carol Lawrence and Larry Kurt, and two moments from the Broadway cast of West Side Story. Now, the show opened in 1957, was a major success, but it lost to The Music Man for Best Musical. It's the 5 years before the film came out in 1961 that the cast album made the rounds. It went on the road. It became a major phenomenon. And when the film was released in 1961, it won 9 Academy Awards of the 10 Oscar nominations it received. And here's Al Hirschfeld's interpretation in the New York Times of West Side Story. You haven't made it big until you were charactered by Al Hirschfeld. So here are the New York Philharmonic years. He becomes the director of the New York Philharmonic. Here he is being congratulated by his fellow musicians. Here is being congratulated by Jenny and Max. They are proud of their son, Lenushka. Lenushka is actually what Shostakovich used to call him, Lenushka. And here are two images of Bernstein rehearsing with the New York Philharmonic. Now, the press would comment about Bernstein, about his emoting, about his gymnastics on the stage. If you did see Bernstein conduct either on video, on television, or in person, you notice that he was very animated when he conducted. He did a thing called the Bernstein dance, where he would just roll his shoulders and move to the music. And it's just great to see. It's almost like a ballet on the podium. When I saw him conduct the El Salam Mexico of Copland, he just literally, and he's, at that point, he's 71 years of age, dancing, prancing on the podium, and at the very end, pushing himself up on the gold bars of the podium to accept the applause of the audience. And here's a man who has suffered from emphysema and smoked 5 packs of cigarettes a day. Now, in 1959, Bernstein conducted a historic concert in Moscow with the New York Philharmonic. Here he is receiving Dmitri Shostakovich. He had just conducted Shostakovich's 5th Symphony. And Max also joined his son and met some relatives that were living in Moscow at the time. So this is a historic evening, historic concert. And here again, the meeting of Shostakovich and Bernstein. Bernstein would conduct many Shostakovich works for Columbia and Deutsche Grammophon. Now, in 1959, 1960, it was decided that a music development, a music theater or a complex of music theaters would be developed and built on the Upper West Side, and that would become Lincoln Center. So here you have Rudolph Bing, who was the general manager of the Metropolitan Opera. They were originally on 39th and Broadway. That building was torn down. It's now a bank. But the Metropolitan Opera would be built over here at Lincoln Center. This was originally Philharmonic Hall. Back here would become Vivian Beaumont Theater. And George Balanchine would be the director of the New York City Ballet at what is now the Koch Theater. That was the New York City Opera House at one point. So here are the three men at the Lincoln Center location. Here is Newsweek promoting the event. The first performance at Philharmonic Hall of the New York Philharmonic included a premiere by Aaron Copland of The Connotations. And here, Jackie Kennedy, who's then still the First Lady, this was again 1962, being greeted by Leonard Bernstein. And in the performance, in the broadcast of the performance, you hear Jackie saying, "Oh, this is beautiful. This is a beautiful performance." Bernstein is constantly asking, "How do you like the hall? How do you like the hall?" And he asks her that question like 4 or 5 times. But here, and Bernstein was a favorite of Jackie and Jack and John Kennedy. Okay, here's a quote by Leonard Bernstein. "Don't be frightened, Mr. Gould is here." 1962, Glenn Gould performs the Brahms Piano Concerto No. 1. Bernstein and Gould had a conflict over the pace, over the speed of the performance of the piano soloists, of the soloist parts of the Brahms Piano Concerto. So at the beginning of the concert, and it's available on the CD, you can hear Bernstein speaking to the audience and warning them, saying he wasn't thrilled with the interpretation, but he's conducting because that's his job. But he was not happy with the interpretation of Glenn Gould's. And very rare that you hear a conductor, especially just before a performance of that work. So now, Bernstein incorporated popular music into his young people's concerts. What is a mode? What is melody? He would incorporate the Beatles and the Kinks. To hear Bernstein sing "You Really Got Me" or to sing a Beatles song is, first of all, that was one thing he could not do. He couldn't sing very well, but he would listen to the albums, or when they would listen to the Beatles in the car, Jamie and Alex and Nina would be in the car, and Bernstein would say, "Hey, listen to this. That's an example of a mode. I think I'm going to use this for my next Young People's concert." And here, this is just an image from one of the Young People's concerts where he's actually singing the Kinks' "You Really Got Me." And the kids in the audience loved it. They loved the fact that here's this older man, this conductor, the New York Philharmonic, singing Beatles and Kinks. This is actually at the Carnegie Hall. The Beatles were in town performing. And if you remember the Beatles in concert, you really couldn't hear them. You could hear the girls screeching in the audience. So here are, Bernstein, Jamie, and Alex at a performance, shielding their ears from the screaming fans. I mentioned the Young People's Concerts. This is one of the books that Bernstein wrote, which included scripts from the Young People's Concerts. It has since been revived. Here's Lenny with the kids and one of the concerts. He performed and hosted 53 Young People's Concerts. Many of you may remember seeing him on television. Many of you probably saw him at some of these Young People's Concerts at Lincoln, first at Carnegie Hall, and then making the transition over to Lincoln Center. Many musicians were inspired by Leonard Bernstein's Young People's Concerts, many who lived across the country. This is their only link to the concert venue, was the Young People's Concerts on Saturday afternoon on CBS. So major impact on many musicians, the Young People's Concerts. Now, Ken Hayman wrote a book called The Private World of Leonard Bernstein. I'll mention that book later. But he followed Bernstein on vacation, at a concert, visiting with Charlie Chaplin. These are 2 images by Ken Hayman of Bernstein conducting the New York Philharmonic. This is from 1968. Very animated conducting style. Another animated conducting moment of Leonard Bernstein's. This is at Tanglewood in 1970. This is Bernstein conducting the Mahler Second Symphony. Bernstein instituted a Mahler festival. Gustav Mahler was not performed as much, but Bernstein made Mahler popular, especially with the festival he instituted in 1970 with the New York Philharmonic. All the Mahler symphonies and works were conducted. This is the finale here that Bernstein is conducting of the Second Symphony. Bernstein is putting his all, as you can see. The man is in total ecstasy, and that was what was great about seeing Bernstein in concert. 1971, was the opening of the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. Kennedy wrote worked for orchestra, chorus, with a mix of folk, rock, and classical called Mass. Mass has just been revived and re-recorded, celebrating its 50th anniversary. This is the premiere of Mass at Kennedy Center. Here's Bernstein rehearsing, and again greeting Jackie Kennedy Onassis. This is the opening again of the Kennedy Center. And now we come to the later years of Leonard Bernstein. Bernstein left the New York Philharmonic as its director, what would become its laureate conductor for the remaining part of his life, but he would also conduct other orchestras, the Israeli and also the Vienna Philharmonic. So those became his three dearest orchestras, the New York Philharmonic, the Vienna, and the Israeli Philharmonic. The Norton Lectures, these are a series of lectures where he would return to Harvard. They were presented under the banner, The Unanswered Question. And these were 6 lectures: musical phonology, musical syntax, musical semantics, the delights and dangers of ambiguity, the 20th century crisis, and the poetry of Earth. So these were a series of lectures. They would be issued on recordings, and now, of course, they're available on DVD. And he would just discuss various aspects of music, the philosophy of music. So if you were a student at Harvard at the time in 1971, 72, you were able to see Bernstein return to his alma mater. And again, here are tributes to Leonard Bernstein, but 2 orchestras that he also conducted and became closely associated with: the Israeli Philharmonic and the Vienna Philharmonic. How we doing? Okay. The Bernsteins at home. Here are the Bernstein family. This is their apartment on Park Avenue before they moved to the Dakota. Another family photo here. Here's Felicia, Alexander, Nina, who's the youngest, and Jamie. And this photo here was a Christmas card. They would always send a family Christmas card every year. So this is around 1971, 72. The Bernstein Christmas family card. Now, Bernstein is seen here with Felicia. They're in rehearsal for the Kiddush Symphony. That was his 3rd symphony. Bernstein became involved romantically with an associate, Greg Arkwart, and left his wife for a man. And Bernstein attempted to become part of the gay lifestyle. And unfortunately, for the relationship between him and Felicia, they got back together, but it was too late because Felicia was dying of cancer and passed away in 1976. And here's Bernstein a year after Felicia's death. But he never got over the guilt of not being with his wife when she really needed him, but a very sad low point in Bernstein's life. Another sad issue, but for different reasons, Bernstein collaborated with Alan J. Lerner in a Broadway musical called 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It's a musical about the presidents of the United States. Now, when it opened in 1976, it closed very quickly. It has since been re-recorded. And one of the songs that came from the show, called Take Care of This House, was performed by Frederica von Stade at the Jimmy Carter presidential inauguration. But it has since become a minor classic, but just not as successful as West Side Story, Wonderful Town, and On the Town. And here is Bernstein, December 7th, 1980. This is the Kennedy Center Honors. And here he's being honored at the Kennedy Center. Bernstein exulting, and here listening to a song sung as tribute to him by his daughter, Jamie. What's interesting also about this evening is that the family celebrated Hanukkah in the Lincoln Room. They set up a menorah in the Lincoln bedroom at the White House before the actual occasion. Just to show you here, here's Nina applauding her father and the concert, and also William S. Paley, who was the chairperson of CBS. Here's Bernstein with the Vienna Philharmonic, performing with the Vienna Philharmonic. Bernstein, as teacher, had many students who would go on to become conductors. Marin Alsop was one of his students. She has since become a conductor. A recording that we just received here at the library, it's available on Apple Music, is the new recording of Candide. A brand new recording. Bernstein would re-record it in 1990, and Marin Alsop conducted it again for a new recording, which is now out on CD. So again, one of his last students, Marin Alsop. I actually attended a Bernstein tribute concert that she performed with the Concordia Orchestra in 1991. This is just after Bernstein had passed away the year before. West Side Story, I mentioned the studio recording that Bernstein was invited to record by Deutsche Grammophon. Here are the soloists: Teresa Stratas, who played Anita, here's Bernstein, Kiri T. Kenowa, who played Maria, and Jose Carreras as Tony. And here are two images of Bernstein during the recording session. Now, this became a market industry franchise of opera performers performing in Broadway musicals. Kiri T. Kenowa and Jose Carreras also did South Pacific together. But there were other recordings made with Broadway performers, what are called crossover. And this is nothing new. Broadway opera singers actually have done crossover for decades. Lawrence Tibbett and Helen Jepsen did a studio recording of Porgy and Bess in 1935. You have Robert Merrill recording excerpts from Carousel. So it's, an industry that continues. Renee Fleming did a Broadway album just a few years ago. It's an ongoing thing. Supposedly Bernstein heard a tenor on radio late night and said, I want that tenor. It was thought that he was requesting Jose Carreras, but I'm not sure who the singer was, but he was not requesting Jose Carreras. But he's on this recording. So it's still available. The CD is out on compact disc, and you can also hear it on Apple Music. The 70th birthday, big deal for Leonard Bernstein. Leonard Bernstein had many tributes that year. Here he is at the Tanglewood tribute. Here's his mother, Jenny. And here Bernstein is greeting many of the cast members who performed at the 70th birthday. And here's the Deutsche Grammophon CD commemorating Bernstein's 70th birthday. 70 minutes of Bernstein to commemorate his 70th birthday. Bernstein at Carnegie Hall. This is one of his last performances at Carnegie Hall, performing an all-Tchaikovsky concert. Here is Bernstein on that podium I mentioned with the gold bars, acknowledging the applause. Bernstein also was an activist. And in this point here, he is helping break down the Berlin Wall, and he performed 2 concerts of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Choral Symphony, and Freiheit, which means freedom, was replaced the word joy. Joy actually became freedom. And here's Bernstein conducting that concert. Again, this is available on video and on CD. So Bernstein conducting the various musicians from different orchestras who came together to perform Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. It was around this time that Bernstein also conducted a concert version of Candide in London with Jerry Hadley, Julia Anderson, and Adolph Green was also part of that, and Friedrich von, not Friedrich von, there's another soloist that he named, what was her name again? Oh, I have a mental block. All right, she was an opera singer. She just passed away recently. You might want to mention that at the end of the program. One of the last ventures that Bernstein was involved with was the Pacific Music Festival. This was a music school that was being formed in Japan. And here are some of the students surrounding a statue of Leonard Bernstein. And here's a DVD of Bernstein in Japan instructing and discussing the Pacific Music Festival. This was in the summer of 1990. Now here we come to Bernstein's last concert performance at Tanglewood, August 19th, 1990. Burton Bernstein mentioned in a documentary that usually the weather for a Bernstein concert at Tanglewood was known as Bernstein weather. Beautiful sun, not a cloud in the sky, blue sky. This day, August 19th, it was raining, it was chilly, with clouds in the sky. And during the performance of the Beethoven Seventh Symphony, Bernstein had an asthma attack. And he is struggling at the podium during one point of the symphony where the musicians are continuing to perform. But Bernstein's family thought, what is going on? Is he going to make it? And he actually persevered and performed the rest of the concert. So it was Beethoven's Seventh Symphony and 4 C interludes for music rhymes by Benjamin Britten. And this is the CD, the final concert. It was soon announced by Bernstein after the concert that he would no longer conduct, and he would continue to teach and possibly write an opera. However, 9 days after he made that announcement, Bernstein would pass away in his apartment at the Dakota. Here's one of the last photos of Bernstein with his family. It's Bernstein's son-in-law with his grandson. Here's Alex, Nina, granddaughter, and Jamie. Now, I want to mention some of the books written by Leonard Bernstein. These have all been reprinted and are available. The aforementioned Joy of Music, this is the reprint here. One of his earliest books, The Infinite Variety of Music, where he discusses various aspects of music. Findings is interesting. I have the original edition of this book. It's a collection of writings going back to one of his first published articles in 1937 for Musical America, his speeches for various occasions, also writings from his student days at Harvard, speeches, scripts. They're all in this collection called Findings. And of course, there are many books about Bernstein. A wonderful biography by Humphrey Burton, Bernstein, which is now available in paperback. Dinner with Lenny by Jonathan Scott, Cott. This was part of a interview that this author did for Rolling Stone magazine. And it was primarily an evening with Bernstein. They listened to music together, they had dinner together, and it was just an evening between this writer and Leonard Bernstein. Famous Father Girl by Jamie Bernstein, What It Was Like to Grow Up Being a Bernstein. Beautiful biography by his daughter. And then you have, of course, from the Jewish biography series, Leonard Bernstein, an American musician by Alan Shawn. The Leonard Bernstein letters, correspondence between Bernstein and various colleagues. This is a photographic essay, Leonard Bernstein at 100. These are photographs of Bernstein through the years, from the earliest, youngest age to his last years, and also a section on the manuscripts, musical manuscripts, letters, all part of Leonard Bernstein at 100. This book is out of print now. You probably can find this at a library or on thrift books or eBay. The Private World of Leonard Bernstein with photos by Ken Heyman. Again, this is the real private world of Leonard Bernstein, vacationing with his family, an evening with Charlie Chaplin, also conducting at the New York Philharmonic. You see him kiss the cufflinks of Koussevitzky, wearing the cape of Koussevitzky, who was a major part of his life. So these are books that mostly are available, some which are out of print, still available through your local library. Leonard Bernstein on DVD. This is just barely touching the surface as far as what's available on DVD. This is one of 2 volumes of the Young People's Concerts. I mentioned the omnibus today. These are all the omnibus broadcasts. Leonard Bernstein conducting Mahler on Deutsche Grammophon. There are many, many DVDs rather, available of Bernstein conducting on this label. Leonard Bernstein conducting Stravinsky. We actually have this here at the library. Bernstein, Stravinsky, their collaboration, their friendship together is actually the basis of the current Bernstein newsletter. Prelude, Fugues, and Riffs is the title of the Bernstein Society newsletter. So they did a whole cover story on Bernstein and Stravinsky. Bernstein Reflections is actually a reissue of an early documentary from the 1970s. This American Masters, I highly recommend. Leonard Bernstein, Reaching for the Note. It was produced by Susan Lacey for PBS's American Masters. An excellent, excellent documentary on the life and career of Leonard Bernstein. And here we have 2 film adaptations of Bernstein musicals, On the Town and, of course, West Side Story. Both of these are available also on Blu-ray. And this barely even touches the surface of CDs. These are some of the box sets that have been released of the Bernstein recorded legacy. All of his Columbia recordings, Deutsche Grammophon, Angel, they're all available on CD. If you don't want the box set, you can get them separately. Again, they're available on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Hoopla. If you have Hoopla, which you can stream through your local library, they are available. Many of his recordings are available on Hoopla. So they are available. Of course, these are some of the cast albums, Bernstein cast albums. Now, of course, we know that West Side Story has been remade. It's coming December 10th, finally. There was a year-long wait. They actually pushed back the date a year. These are some scenes from the new West Side Story. Here's the poster. We all remember Rita Moreno as Anita in the 1961 film version of West Side Story. Now she plays the manager and owner of the candy shop. Remember Doc in the original West Side Story? Now she's playing the role of a female manager of West Side Story. They needed to do something with her because she wanted to do something. And of course, it's directed by Steven Spielberg. So here he is with his cast members. And I think what will be nice about this production is that you have starring cast members who can sing and dance. And I don't believe anyone is dubbed in this film. Keep in mind that Marty Nixon dubbed for Natalie Wood, Jim Bryant dubbed for Richard Beamer. The name just came back to me. Krista Ludwig. Krista Ludwig is the opera singer who just passed away. She was in that cast recording of Candide. I'm glad it came to me now than in the middle of the night, so that's a good thing. Now, 2018 was the centennial of Leonard Bernstein's life. So Lincoln Center did a whole big tribute to Leonard Bernstein at 100. Google did a Google, I believe they call it a Google something, or the Google something where they do a caricature of the person they're highlighting. So here they actually equaled Bernstein's Google to actual Bernstein. This is actually a performance that he did of Mahler's Second Symphony. So here's Google, here's Bernstein, here's Google again, and here's Bernstein. And here are the Google kids. Google, Jamie, Alex, and Nina at one of the Bernstein at 100 tributes. And this is the poster for the Bernstein at 100 tribute at Tanglewood. And this was, again, the piano from Aunt Clara that started it all. That was given to the Bernstein family, and which Bernstein touched the keys and felt that he had touched God. And that began his career in music. And here's Leonard Bernstein. So I'm Philip Hardwood, New York State librarian, film and music historian. These are, of course, the postage stamps that came out. Notice they came out a while ago because stamps are no longer 34 cents. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and join you all. And if you'd like to unmute and ask me a few questions, I do have 10 minutes because the library will be closing in 10 minutes. Don't want to be locked in. So does anyone have any questions or comments? If you can, let me see if I can unmute you. Or you can unmute yourselves. Margaret, can you unmute everyone or?
I don't know if there's a key for that. Raise your hand if you need unmuting.
Okay.
There we go. People, everybody.
And it's very loud as usual. That's our 10-minute warning. So does anyone have a question or comment? Yes, Rochelle.
Yes, hi. This is wonderful. Just comment. Question. Given his age, how was it that he avoided or didn't serve during the war? Because he was obviously home and doing music through that.
The asthma was the thing that set him back. And also he had an ear problem in one ear. The primary thing was the asthma. The asthma was really what kept him back. So that's the reason why he didn't go into the army. Sandy, yes. I'm not sure. Are you Sandy or?
No, it's Bird.
Bird, okay, Bird.
Okay. My first wife's aunt was a woman named Wita. Her maiden name was Wita Blatt, and she was a piano student of the same teacher as Leonard Bernstein.
Bernstein, and that's that she became Wita Mintz.
She became Wita Mintz. You know
Yes,
her.
I have her book. Wita Mintz was a friend and music student, and she studied with Leonard Bernstein. Well, they both studied with the same piano
They
teacher.
studied with the same piano teacher, and she told me that the piano teacher thought that Bernstein was a fraud and she was going to be the big star.
Which I think Wita alludes to in the book. She alludes to in the book. She has a book called My Friend Lenny, and she writes about Leonard Bernstein and Mike Wallace. And I met her daughter. Her daughter used to come to a lot of my events at the JCC in Oceanside, and she would tell me wonderful stories about Wita, and they're in the book also, called My Friend Lenny. And there are wonderful photos in the book of her and Leonard Bernstein in their early years.
Yeah, she also said that there was a tragic accident. Her son died in a boating accident.
Yeah.
And she immediately she went to a Leonard Bernstein concert a few days afterwards, and she went backstage, and they spent about a half an hour together because they were friends.
And he never forgot his friends. He always kept, he kept in touch. He wrote a lot of letters to everyone. And when he was a very affectionate type of person. So he'd give you the big bear hug, not myself, I'm saying the people that he knew. I mean, you see this all the time. When he ever conducted a concert, he would bear hug the principal violinist, and he would bear hug the soloist. And, he just believed in kissing and hugging and very, very affectionate. But there's just some wonderful photos of her, of Wita and Leonard in her book.
Mm-hmm.
So just wonderful stories. Anyone else? Don't all speak at once.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to thank you all for joining in. Again, I'm Philip Hardwood, film historian and librarian. And thank you all.
Thank you, Phil. It was a
Thank you
wonderful,
so much.
wonderful program.
I enjoyed it. It was great.
Bye-bye, everyone. Stay safe.